Hello there. Let's talk about Legionwood. It's a game I've played a lot, and I wanted to about it from a particular design standpoint to really get a feel if it's a good game or a bad game or just like a meh game. So let's start at it with Chapter 1, the intro area. As we can see in the starting area, it's super simple. We start with some items. This is mainly because of the DLC, but everyone should have it because it's free. And we start with some text, and although it's not explained explicitly, it will get explained later in the battle tutorial. And we start with some free equipment, and we can change it out. Now, I've kind of skipped through because I didn't want to start a new save file. That's where the chest is already open, but it does explain how to move around, how to interact with things. We already see a green light just like at the beginning, so we're already being shown things that we need. So if we look at the town itself, if I had to guess what shop that would be, it would be the item store, and that's what it says. It very simply explains that. Here we see the spell. It's the tech store. Okay. There's the green light. We get a free item. It's already rewarding us for exploring. So it's very clear here that these areas are trying to get us to explore. And there's some sort of intuitive, like, yeah, this is what you think it is? Yeah, we're not lying. There's the quill. Usually in most games quests. Yes, this is a chest. Yes, you can interact with it. Here's some free money. You are being rewarded for doing so. Now, one of the big pros here is that the tutorials can be skipped, but if you're new to the game, they do make you go through them. So, as I'm showing here, you have to go back. You have to go back to the man with the quill and get the beast book. It's got a simple tutorial. It explains what it does, and it has a purpose for your first playthrough and later playthroughs with one of the optional quests that gets you a nice reward. Now, the nice thing about here is you can just kind of match the spacebar button or A or whatever, and you can just get to go through it. It's not like the legendary Ocarina of Time owl that everyone just hates. They hate because, or loves to hate, I should say, because it's just so annoying to mash through. It's like, oh, I hit the wrong button. I have to go through it. No, as you saw, this was super simple, super easy, and very intuitive. Now, there is one thing I think most people will have issues with, and I kind of agree and kind of disagree. It's this well right here. So it's clearly interactable because of the highlights, and we're being rewarded for exploring, and this is a dangerous area to go at level 1. You will die, period. Unless you get the wards, then you can get some of the early items, but you will never be able to finish it because the boss will just be too difficult. It does give us a warning. When we do enter, we can leave immediately because of how the interactions leave. It's just like opening and closing a door, so you won't run into a combat if you do that. So I think it's fine overall. And then once we get to the overworld, this is where I'm going to have some nice compliments, and I'm going to have one major complaint here. So obviously we can't leave through here. It kind of looks like it, but there's no arrow like over the town, so sure, that makes sense. And see some of the beautiful scenery in this area and the lovely music. We can clearly walk around. There's the light. It's not green, but that would blend in too easily, so making it white, good change. Now at the bottom right-hand corner here, I'm going to kind of show that's where we have to go, all right? But there's this cave here, which isn't too difficult to miss. It's got an arrow. It shows we can go through here, and we can walk back and forth. And then we can keep walking until we get into a combat encounter. We haven't been taught how combat works. We are rewarded with the chest, and yeah, maybe there's a chance we don't run into it, but that is a bit of an issue from a design standpoint and a gameplay issue, because some games might be programmed weird, or you might not understand stuff, and that's kind of annoying as a player. Now, no matter what you do here, you'll always run into this, even if you have a glyph board that says you don't run into combat after a certain number of steps. But here, you can skip the tutorial. It's great. The tutorial itself, super simple, well-designed. You're basically guaranteed to get this combat done. Lon has to hit 4 times. And then the sister can do nothing. They just won't do enough damage. Plus you have items and whatnot. It's super simple and well done. But the fact that you can do combat without being taught how to do combat is kind of an issue for me. That it's not checking for the first combat encounter. It's checking for this one in particular. But that's going to wrap up our intro area, and we'll move on to the next chapter. So let's get in and talk about the combat system that's in Legionwood. It's an RPG. It's very classic to the format. So let's go ahead and run into a combat. Now, we ran into 3 nightmares. We can combat or we can flee. That's our choice. If we choose flee here, we'll notice that it will either succeed or fail, and if it fails, nothing happens. Everything just goes in as normal. So there's not a whole lot of nuance here of what I want to choose at all. If I'm low, I don't have to do the risk reward at all. I can just flee and then go unpunished, which makes combat kind of very simple. But if we do go into combat here, we'll notice that there are some nice things that the system does have going for it. So if we go ahead and attack with strike, we'll notice there's A, B, and C. So we can keep track of each one individually to see which one's which. And there's a little bit of a counterintuitive part to this. So you notice A is in the back, so that's the first one. That's the one that'll take the most damage, and B and C will take a reduced damage until A is dead. If it was front to back, it'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. That's in fact how this works in Final Fantasy VII, unless your weapon is considered ranged. But here, it's back to front. Which kind of hurts my brain a little bit, but that's whatever. And there's this kind of other negative that goes with it. We can see their HP, so we don't have to make decisions if we need to heal or attack, because we just know about how much damage we're going to do. We know how much HP it has. So it's really simple for our choices if we really want to kill it or not. So that's the monster side of thing. Let's go into the player side of thing with the tech tree. You start out with double strike, and then you also start with flame strike and freeze bolt and healing light. So when I'm going in to choose these, they're not in a particular order. It's not first learned because those ones that I just mentioned would be at the top, and it's not alphabetical because, well, crumble is next to water bolt and wind bolt, and there's healing lights. So H does not go before C and then after W. I don't get what the order is, and it changes per character, so you can have the same list of spells, but they'll be in a different order, so I don't know what's choosing. Now, there are these passive ones that are here as well. So bonus critical makes me more likely to crit, bonus heal makes me heal for more, dual wielding changes my equipment. I can't select these, they're just passive skills, things that just give me a benefit. So it's kind of annoying that they're here. If they wanted to be reminder text, they should be at the bottom, but that kind of gets into my ordering issue that I mentioned before. It's just not that great. But there is a boon to this tech system. If we look at Time Slip here, this is just like a better version of Order of Death. Arcane Weave and Regain Stream are versions that help HP and SP. Anathema there is good against undead. There's not a whole lot of like they're stepping on top of each other's toes. However, Pirouette is just really good. It has a chance to stun and it hits everything. It's an area of effect. We're just gonna kind of show that I'll probably just one-shot everything here. When you do dual wield, which I'll get into later, you get to do it twice at the cost of using it once for your SP. Now notice here that the monster did a rage thing for its tech, and this doesn't always work. You won't always get the same defense down, match down, agility down, and then the attack boost. The attack boost is always there, but the stats it loses is never consistently the same. So the attacks, at least on the monster side, don't seem to always work correctly. So I just don't understand how these monsters work. Now, when we look at these monster stats over here, we'll see all their information, but we never had to like spend anything to learn it. We just know it, including the spoils. So after you run into it, you can just run away, never touch it, and get all of this information. Boss-wise, the earlier monsters are fairly reasonable to fight. 4,000 HP as our first optional boss versus 200 for that. So you have to survive several rounds. There we go. You have to survive several rounds of combat. 122 SP is obviously a lot when most of your spells at this point are going to cast 4. I think the waterfall one costs like 8 or something. this is also where the combat system pulls one of its nice tricks. The Kraken, you'd think would be weak to lightning, but it's actually weak to fire, and they have a little droplet, like a little skeleton with the little sparkles that says it's weak to fire. And the stuff scales and whatnot. So this isn't just true of our spells. You can see this does blow damage. Let's see, piercing damage. It's more blow damage. Range, piercing. Come on, there's more. Strike, slashing damage. There we go. That's what I was looking for. There's different kinds of damage, which it's registered differently. So let's just walk around real quick, and I'll kind of show you what I mean. Okay. Back, 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 walk. You can see I do 1 damage and 0 for the second one because of blowy, despite Lon's attack being super high. I'll show you how high in a bit. You can see, despite her attack being significantly lower, did 2,000 damage. Okay, so let's look at Lon's stats. 704 attack, and I was using a physical attack, so it registers through there. That's not through magic. And even if it was through magic, because it's a staff, that's 750. So really, really high versus Alexis's blade. Basically half the stats. I was doing way more damage. 1 versus 2,000 something. You can even look at the levels. So it's kind of weird how the damage system works in this regard. Because you can't say they're immune because they weren't taking damage. So it probably, if they are supposed to be immune to blow damage, it's fairly common, by the way, then it isn't implemented correctly. And you don't need a lot of any stats. Do stuff because she was doing 2,000 damage a hit, but when he was using his parry attack, he was also doing 2,000 a hit, sometimes a little lower. And you could say, well, maybe it's a physical attack. So let's swap these out. So let's look at the damage difference between the equipment. So we're attacking our blue little orc here with our staff. 1 damage, the other one did 0 damage. If we use our wind rapier plus the imperial weapon, it's 3,400. Huge difference with the damage type. But let's keep that in mind for just a second. We're still using the staves, but we use parry. So that's 2,000 damage to 2,500 damage. So it's removing the damage type that they're implementing that they should be resistant to, which is like a major mechanic. I guess it's a skill and not sort of like a quote-unquote basic attack where you just hit the attack button. That's a huge difference. Really huge. And despite having significantly better stats, it's doing the same ballpark as damage as a basic attack from someone who's 60 levels lower. That's a balancing issue in my opinion. Really big balancing. And even though we're going from 705 attack to whatever Alexis' attack is, 1,300 damage, is that really... should it be more? Should it be less? Especially with how things scale. Keep in mind, these monsters have like 6,000 HP. And adding 5 more attack on either one will increase their damage by about 10. So, a full level for the first 25.5 levels would be that much more. 155 times 2, 500 more damage. Now we have to start using stat boosters to mitigate that. Kinda crazy. Just for the record, in this run, I have been shoving every stat booster on long because this was my one-man run. but it kind of shows you the discrepancy in stats only matters on the extreme ends. You know, if it's super close, the damage isn't going to be that much different. Which I think is an interesting design choice, whether it's deliberate or not. It's in the game, so you have to deal with it. Now, there's one thing we haven't talked about, which is the block mechanic. Out of all the options we can choose, and the items, I suppose, as well. Block reduces damage. It's also bugged as all heck, where if you block, you can gain SP and HP if you have the right defensive stats versus an enemy. Which, if you want to see, basically just look at my one-man run, and I use it all the time because free HP is free HP. Item-wise, like in every game, you have healing items, which just kind of heal for too much. Half your HP, half your magic, a bunch of cure. Angel's Tear's fine. These don't have a set amount of damage. They scale with your magic, so it's basically like using that spell. So with the Flame Tome, Firebolt. So if you're having a mage use it, it'll do as much damage as a Firebolt, so why not just use Firebolt? And if you're out of SP, why not just use a Peptide? And you can be like, oh, you have 26. Clearly, you've bought. This is just all of the ones I've gotten for free. Because you get all your SP back when you level up. I haven't bought any of these. Didn't need them. You know, doubles. That one helped. It's spicy and you can use it before combat. Some of these, you know, buffs you can use before combat, like the Miracle Loot. Everyone's doubles. Really good, super helpful. It helped me win one major boss fight in my solo run. And then I haven't tested the reflective down, but meh. This item's also bugged, as is this one. So yay. There's one last thing to talk about in the combat system, and that's the summons. You can see here I only have one character now, so I'm going to go into combat just to show how this works. Okay, so you go to your items, and there's a bunch of these summons. So this is the last one you get. So we'll go ahead and look at this. Now this takes up your 5th slot, so you can't see their stats at all, unless you do it like this. So we're just going to kind of show, this is what they look like. They can level up, and you have no control over what they do. But they soak up free damage. It works a little different than like in some of the Final Fantasy games where you summon it, it does one thing, and it's usually just a bunch of AoE damage. This is an entire extra character with SP and HP. You can heal and do other stuff with, but most of the time it's just they're gonna do something. As you can see, does no damage whatsoever, and it's the last summon you get. I don't expect them to be like as good as a character, but 200 damage, man, for an end game summon, not good. Like, doesn't even apply a status effect. That's at 16 at that time. And you can see they do get XP. You can't see it if it's the 5th slot. So normally you would have 4 people. You just can't see anything about them. And you might say, oh, hey, dude, I saw they were level 27. Oh, sure. And they weren't doing any damage. Sure. Let's take a quick look here. Level 20. They're doing way more damage. Like 10 times more damage. That's not a particularly great system. And we haven't even gotten to the worst part of the combat. So, optional boss. Super hard. Not really. So he has 500,000 HP, and then 400,000 HP in the second form. Can't be poisoned, which is a separate rant. We're doing 2,000 damage for a character, and you're going to be stuck using 1 to 2 to heal. Doesn't run out of magic ever. If he does, he just uses a spell. Really annoying. It's like a 20-minute fight where you just hit space. You just hit him over and over and over. Can't be stunned, no status effects, everything, just immune to everything. And you just hit him over and over and over and over and over and over and over for 20 minutes. The challenging part is not losing your sanity. Basically, you equip 1 item. Where's equip? And even though this says negative static effects, death is one of those status effects. That's it. You know what the best part about beating the Rift monster is? You get this really nice equipment, which you'd be like, oh, so you went on your way to do a request to get better equipment, which would make the game easier. Wrong. They actually make the game harder. They basically add a lot of hit points to the final boss. But the game just gets harder. Like, it's just such a slugfest, even with your better equipment. It scales harder than your equipment benefit gets. So the game just gets harder. The final boss, if you beat him, is also just as ridiculous. You can see that in my run. And it's just super duper bad. That the challenging section is just running it. Like this, 66,000 hit points. So this is the boss before the final boss. Actually, no, I lied. That's the Lich. 74,000, and he summons a bunch of monsters. That's like the challenging section. And he's a hard fight. So the balancing with these fights isn't particularly great. But there's one thing that makes it super duper easy, and that's your equipment choice of the Poison Jerk. Something you get right away at the beginning of the game. Poison Jerk, Toxify. Toxify does 10% of your max HP, no matter what. So if you have 1,000,000 hit points, you take 100,000. There's a boss version of the final boss where they beat it in 5 minutes because they just apply a poison effect, hit block, so it cycles through their turn super fast, and just boom. You can't physically do that much damage. This is the second best weapon in the game, and you get it in the first dungeon. You go through the meadow, you go into the cave, and there it is. And it's arguably the best one because you get it first. You have to wait a while to get this one. It also cuts down the foe's defense, so you do a little extra damage when you hit. 2 best weapons in the game. And it's because they apply Toxify Strike. You can't match the output of damage. And it gives you a free turn sometimes too, because they'll toxify them and they'll cast it to remove the toxic strike. Well, and that's their turn. And then everyone else is stunning them. So it's just, combat is both too simple and too difficult, because you're either one-shotting everything or you're just grinding forever. And there's no in between. You're either using poison and they're gonna die in 10 turns no matter what. We have to apply it a second time, so we'll call it 11 turns. It took you an extra try, plus all the extra damage, so it's just gonna shoot down. Or you can't apply it and they have 1,000,000 hit points. It takes forever. And this isn't like a quarrel that I just have. There are several posts online from people who play tested on the RPG Maker forums and some other indie game forums. And the creator has been like, yeah, I would fix it, but I don't want to touch that code. It's been too long. I don't want to screw it up. And it's their free game, so not particularly balanced, and that's a huge detriment to any game. There's challenge, and then there's insanity, and this is veering more towards insanity. Wrap this section up. Combat is entirely too simple. All of your decisions, if you want to make any optimal choice, pretty obvious in my opinion. And even if you play suboptimally, it's still fairly simplistic. So in order to design themselves out of the corner that they're in, they just have to like off everything. They just have to make the numbers go really high, which is just fundamentally uninteresting. Overall, though, I would still say the combat does feature a lot of good things. Let's really talk about the design characteristics of what they're trying to portray as a character in Legionwood. For example, let's take the dwarf. If you can't find him, in the bottom left-hand side. Pretty easy to find. Big bushily beard, helmet, looks like a fighter. And for a throwaway character, he looks good. Like, he just moves over to block a dungeon when you're done with it, and unblock it when you meet a certain criteria. I think the one odd thing about his design is the red eyes, and I don't know if I like or hate it, because I usually think of a more cool color like an emerald green or a sapphire blue. But the red, that like ruby red, that's an interesting touch. Something I didn't really notice until I started thinking about these characters as a design. Just a brief mention, I don't think all of these models were used. The bottom right-hand corner, that kind of group, weren't used for the most part. I can only think of one, the little lady in the red helmet, who I don't think embodies what they should. They are, just to remind you, you go through the desert and then there's that underground city. She's the digital internet security person, or not really internet, just the security person for the area so you can escape. I don't think that really speaks like I'm a digital security. I mean, in some sense, yeah, I guess some nerd wants their waifu to protect them. I don't feel like it's very robotic or digital. You know, it's not like, yeah, I would see this in the Tron universe or something. It just looks like any of the other characters. And if I, asked you which one of these existed digitally in the game, I don't think you'd be able to point that out. There are some more successful character designs like Lon's mother in the top right-hand corner. She certainly looks more middle-aged versus some of these younger characters who look like they're in their teens or maybe their 20s. Definitely looks more like a mom than some of the other characters. And for their older characters, they didn't go with the "I'm an old man" look, where they're over in their cane. They still look like good characters, but they're certainly older. Like the man in the mustache with the big, I don't know, it's not like quite like a Waluigi mustache, but it looks sick as hell. Nice sweet jawline, but his skin is still kind of fresh. They probably should have aged him a little bit more other than with the gray hair. But other than that, I mean, he looks really cool. And we can tell, some of these characters have been through some combat. Some of them have scars right over their eye and they're constantly squinting, or they've got it on their little X on their cheek. I think it looks good. I don't like the X mark as much. I don't think it looks more scarish. It just kind of looks like frost lines. But still, a lot of these characters are well drawn. And I don't think get good credit for that. And then when you look at these characters versus the main cast, there is a difference. The main cast sticks out, as it should. So here's 4 of the 6. The next 2 I'll show over the next section. But if we look at Lon, for example, our main protagonist, you can certainly see when each sort of picture would be used for a text box. He's concerned. Well, yeah, I know which one you're talking about. I don't have to point at it. Is he like kind of embarrassed? Well, we got the classic cheeky red lines. Or he's happy or angry. Like, they all portray these pretty well. And you can say these for pretty much all of the characters. I don't quite like Lon's or Ark's concerned face. I don't like how that tear shows up. Otherwise, fine. And I particularly like the idea that our male characters aren't some beefcake factory with a giant sword or gun or whatever. They're just, well, they look like normal-ish people for the most part. And the female cast isn't miniskirt, vest topless chick generic. There's some personality. Take, for example, our favorite redhead in the bottom left-hand corner. She's a pirate. And they don't lean into the tropes super hard, even from a story perspective, where she's an ex-pirate. She looks like your dexterity character. Just one quick note from our sister's characteristic. She has that same beret and sort of blue eye characteristics that our mother still has, kind of like a derivative of that next down the line. Lon's doesn't, which is interesting. If we go over to the next two characters, there's less known about them from a story perspective. Like, so the guy on the left, I forget his name, which is not good. But he's supposed to be some sort of stalwart knight who's, you know, good in combat. He looks like a confident dude. He doesn't like scream knight though. We don't see like shoulder pads or like a helmet or anything. There's like very little armor to him, which is, I think, an interesting design choice. And then from our sprites that we can kind of see, there's a lot of character out of them. I don't get why they chose to outline them in red, but these certainly look recognizable for who they're supposed to be and are functional. And when we compare this to our more monstrous or antagonists, there's a stark design contrast. So, like, if we look at the assassin, the masked man, he looks kind of menacing. Like, we can't even see all of his face. We just see like the bridge of his nose and where his eyes are. We can't even see his mouth. The main demon, he looks pretty evil. Just glowing red eyes, black skin, got the canine teeth. Yeah, sure, pretty evil. The imp, it's a design. Usually I don't think of imps as this like teal greenish color. I don't expect the fangs to come out of the corner of their mouth, but like, it's not like a bad design. It certainly looks something that came from hell. The werewolf to the left of that, on the other hand, looks more like a wereboar. From its design, with how the teeth come out, they look more like tusks than anything else. It doesn't quite look like what it's supposed to. The certain like hair aspects to it, yeah, that works fine. The ears, sure, they look doggish, but the nose, that's like a oink. Like, it doesn't look right. The use of brown, it's like all brown except for the eyes, which is like a nice orange, but they could have done something more like accent the colors rather than just be dirt. Like it's just a dirt color. And at the bottom, I have some. It's a mix of what they are. You have like the nun and the lady that teaches you skills and the merchant, just to show more of a contrast between what some of these characters would look like. So overall, from its design standpoint, it's a bit of a hit or miss. They're either like, yeah, this is spot on, or it's like, really? That's where you went with your design? It's an interesting take, but nah. I would give it like E or C. It passes from a design perspective. Now let's talk about the music of Legionwood. Now, for a free indie game, I expected some like fairly generic songs and for it to be recycled a fair amount. I was wrong. Very wrong. There is 4.25 hours worth of music. And you might be thinking, well, does that include sound effects? No, that's its own separate file type, which is pretty much taken from RPG Maker 15. So it's really uninteresting to talk about, being it's just what the base system uses. And is more than likely just a limitation of developer resources. This is why they're using an RPG Maker versus just making from scratch themselves. So let's talk about some of the songs within the game. Each one of the towns ends up having their own song, which is quite nice because you're able to distinguish not only from looks, but from how it sounds, and their themes match. A good example of this would be what they call Town 6. The files don't depict what it is, but we're just going to call it Town 6 to keep it super easy and straight. And just to give it a little bit of context as to what I'm talking about, I'm going to play a little bit of the song, and then I'll kind of have an image of where it's from in the game. Now, the waves you're hearing in the background aren't actually part of the song. They're just a sound effect, but they go well with this kind of Caribbean feel that we've had. When we enter through a ship, we just kind of go through into this nice upbeat, uplifting sound. We just cleared a dungeon and gotten one of the swords, of the 2 swords of Legionwood. So things are looking up. There's this nice positive vibe for our heroes, and it really goes well, and it ties into kind of the look that I showed while walking through the area. The steel drum noise, that nice happy vibrant noise with a nice relaxed beat to it. It's not super fast. There's no like dissonance or stress between the notes. You just have a nice bass line doing its thing. Steel drums. That's good. It sounds good. Let's move on to just one of the other town themes. As you might have seen, the town had burned down, so there's nothing left but this tent city. So when we're looking at it thematically, what do we first hear? We hear a crackling fire, kind of like the waves from the last one, which are reminiscent of the recent past that had just happened, and a solitude instrument playing by itself. And it's at a very slow pace. So it's got a slow tempo. It's not like something you necessarily hear in Sonic where you're just like, there's a lot of action happening, pushing forward. It's slow. We don't have a lot of fast notes, and the tempo overall is slow as well. And this kind of sets up for an environment that makes the song sound reflective as what just happened. Which is exactly what this piece should be doing. And there's one other thing that really helps flesh out this idea, the fact that they use a minor key rather than a major key. Now, a major key tends to sound relatively happy and nice, like this. That was an F major key, but the composer chose to write it in F minor, which is going to sound a little different. That clearly, tonally different. And because of the selection of notes we chose to use, we get this different feel. And this really plays into this kind of more darker themed song, as it should. Now, the name of the song is called Unnecessary. This isn't actually one of the town themes, but it shifts to a town theme after the fire takes place, which is a great way to use a piece of music. And just to get a little bit of the music theory out there of kind of why this piece sounds the way it does, is we start with an F. Well, this is kind of the first note in our scale of the tonic note. It's where we're going to start. It's what we're going to consider to be home. So we stay there and we kind of establish where we're at. And then we go down to a B flat, so down a fifth, and then we're going to go up a third to accentuate this kind of chord. It's not going to be in its most stable form, but it's still an F minor chord. And we'll return to an F, and then we'll slowly go back down to E. So we don't quite stay at home. And then once the full phrase is finished, we go back to the tonic. And then this repeats one more time. We kind of get this loop. And then afterwards, when we have the shift upwards, we go from an F to an A. So we go up a third, which kind of makes it sound a little bit more happy. But then we go back to the original. And it's because of how this is written, how simple it is, that it really drives the message home and helps the player feel the story is more real or impactful, even though it's in a digital world. There are several other pieces we could talk about. Primarily, the final boss theme. It goes way harder than it needs to. It's so good. And I mean that in a very positive way. The music, to me, is good. Especially considering it's an indie game. And, you know, it's not like they had, like, a full orchestra they could deal with or anything like in a Nintendo game or something. This is just RPG Maker, so it's good. It's really good for what it does. I'll give them a lot of points. And before I kind of wrap things up, there's one thing I want to address. In all of my playthroughs, I do talk about how there's bugs in the game. Even the most well-designed, prevalent games have bugs. for example, Super Mario Sunshine by Nintendo. There's a bug where if you pause, the collision stops working in some spots, so you can like fall through solid objects to like cheese stuff. There's an infinite speed glitch in Wind Waker where you swim backwards, you can go across the map. there there are several like pause or death glitches where you can store stuff in and play the game through the opening window and Wind Waker, and there's two other Zelda games that run off that engine where you can actually store stuff. So every game's gonna have its bugs, even if it's made by a major company. So I'm not going to withdraw any like quote unquote points. I haven't been giving like any sort of a total. I'm not gonna penalize them for having the bugs. It's not like there's anything that soft locks the game at all. So overall, I think its intro area makes the game start out very strong from a design standpoint. And even though its combat system isn't necessarily the most interesting, a lot of JRPGs aren't necessarily that interesting as a design standpoint. They're usually a little bit better, but for a first game and it's indie, I'm willing to overlook some aspects of that. So it's still kind of an okay game at this point. And from kind of a more character design, I think, they did better than those other two categories, which isn't saying a whole lot, but it's still decent. And then looking at kind of the musicality that goes with everything else in the game, it really boosts it in terms of playability and enjoyment. Overall, if I had to give this game like a letter grade, even though I've been a little harsh on it, that's just kind of who I am. I would probably give it like a B- or something. I would recommend playing this game. I enjoyed it. And, if you're thinking about making a game, or just playing some like indie games to see what kind of mistakes designers are making at the beginning, this will kind of help highlight some of them, and not necessarily in a bad way, but you'll just kind of feel it and you can appreciate all of the decisions that get made when making a game. I highly recommend playing this. It's worth your time. It's like a 10-hour game for free, and I've done multiple playthroughs even before doing recordings for YouTube. So check it out and take care.